Okay, hi guys, welcome to this week's video. I thought I'd try a bit of a sort of question and answer style post with this one, because this question comes up a lot. And it's probably, if anyone's ever done a glute bridge before, they come and see me, I guarantee this issue is going to come up at some point. So again, obviously, still not in a full-time gym at the minute, so excuse the filming from the garage, excuse the construction work going on down the road, which is, some guy's grinding at the moment, so it's not ideal. But we'll do the best that we can. Anyway, so yeah, glute bridges. Big issue here, it's a technique issue. And again, two things we bear in mind anytime we need to answer a question when it comes to spinal rehab or any rehab for that matter, is the answer is always going to start with "it depends," and that gives us time to consciously work through the benefits, advantage and disadvantage of choosing one method versus another. But to do that, we need to understand the injury mechanics of what's before us. So if you've got a bad back, or you're working with people that have got a bad back, and you want to know that the safest, most effective way to do a glute bridge, we need to understand that you need to understand their injury mechanics. So for example, worst case scenario for someone doing glute bridges is if they have what we call flexion intolerance. So flexion is rounding your lower back. So naturally, your lower back's got kind of a sort of a slight indent to it when you stand up straight. And it's got a little bit of what we call neutral range that you can sort of move in. But danger is if we go into excessive flexion, and again the poison's in the dose, and you're doing it repeatedly, you want to call excessive wear and tear on your discs, and that's how in fact you get a disc bulge and eventually a herniation, and lose disc height, or one of the ways you're going to lose disc height. So if you've got something that presents with flexion intolerance, or they already have disc bulges and herniations, non-negotiable, you don't want to put them into extra flexion when they do their exercises. You want to take out all instances of flexion, as much as possible, so that disc can heal and settle, and the injury can settle. We definitely don't want to put it into the exercises that they're going to be doing for reps, which is just going to re-aggravate, poke the bear if you like, and re-aggravate the issue. So why is this an issue with glute bridges and technique? Well, let's have a look. So glute bridge technique. So we're on the floor. Just as a quick note, the easiest way to get your feet sort of right is if you put your hands down by your sides, you should kind of almost just be able to touch, your heels, your fingertips. Then from there, you can find just feet in, feet out, wherever you want to have them, and also the angle of your feet to kind of suit, but that give you a sort of a starting point. So a glute bridge, what's a glute bridge for those who don't know, is basically a way of, our goal is to use the glutes to drive the hips off the floor into this bridge position here, like this, and then back down again. And the whole point of what we do them in, particularly in lower back rehab, is that we're trying to improve strength and control over the glutes themselves, because you show me someone with back issues, I'll show you someone with dysfunctional hips, and I can guarantee they've got very little, if any, control of hip extension, driving the hips forward or up in this case, by using their glutes, and they'd rather use their hamstrings and the lower back, which is pretty dangerous to someone who's got a history of back problems. So our goal is we want to use the glutes. So what can happen is in this position, particularly if you go to this exercise too early, you haven't done sort of enough groundwork with other glute exercises to get here. In this position, for a lot of people putting their hips up, they just can't get a connection to the glutes. They'll just throw their hips up using their hamstrings or their back, or they'll come up slowly. It's all just like all over the place. So then someone will say, well, why don't you tuck your hips? So what I mean by tucking my hips is to sort of, my lower back is like this off the floor naturally. They get taught to flatten their back into the floor and then peel their spine off the floor as a way to, if I do it here, if I drive in and then peel, as a way to make it a little bit easier to squeeze your glutes and get them to sort of fire. So again, that's obviously spinal flexion, excessive spinal flexion, and we don't want to be doing it for reps of an exercise on someone who's got either flexion intolerance, a disc bulge, or a herniation. That's non-negotiable. That, if you do that, that's going to make their injury worse. That's not like my opinion, that is, that's fact. So we can't tolerate that in exercise technique. So what, our goal is, we're going to find the glutes. People find it hard. That solution to that problem then creates another problem. So what's another way that we can make it a bit easier for someone to fire their glutes in this position? Well, it's easy. We just get a band like this. So this one's from Perform Better. So I've got a couple of these now. I get them free when I do the Stuart McGill courses, every few years. But again, they don't need to be very expensive. And, a lot of shops now you can go in and they might sell sort of like a pack of 4 or 5 in sort of various, strengths and tensions. And, that's a good idea for pretty cheap, for sort of $20 or so. You can get a pack of these and then you can use them for things like glute bridges. And all we need to do is use this band to help us, fire the glutes a bit easier. So how do we do that? Easy. We just put it onto our legs. So normally what I like to do with the band is have it just above the knees, but because this is like a short band and it's just going to dig into my skin because I've got fairly thick legs, I'm going to put it just below my knees. So usually 9 times out of 10, it's better if you can have it slightly above your knees. You'll get a bit more, it's a bit easier to feel the glute working. But again, if the band's digging into your skin and that's distracting you, there's no point. So, for this one, for me, I put them just below. So again, get my feet roughly in the right position. And what we do by using the band is, obviously the band is trying to collapse my legs and pull me in this way. If I put tension on that band, the way I do that is by using my glutes to help control that. So they're helping stabilize my knees, yeah? So if we put some tension on the band first, I'm kind of halfway there. I've got a bit of a signal starting to come in. So for some people, it might be a case of just practicing this. Just do these. Just get a feel for trying to get the glutes to fire in this position and then be able to hold it for time. Now once you feel pretty comfortable with that, so you've got a bit of a signal, I want you to squeeze your glutes so hard that you just happen to raise your hips off the floor because of the tension that's in your glutes. So the whole time I'm putting the band apart and I'm driving my hips to the sky by squeezing life out my glutes. So I'll come up slowly and then I'll hold for a 10 count here. And again, just come down nice and smooth. And again, if you want a little relax, you can do. And again, re-engage, pull the band apart, squeeze the glutes so hard your hips happen to come off the floor and drive off. And maybe when you're doing this, when you first start, you might barely come off the floor, but at least the tension's to your glutes. So again, that's the goal of our glute bridge, is not to see how high you can get your hips straight off the bat, is to actually use your glutes to this movement. So if they're weak, you might do small movements to begin with, but over time, as you learn to fine tune that signal and get it stronger, you better come all the way up, fully into hip extension, and squeeze the life out of your glutes and get a monstrous burn, which is what we're looking for. But again, because we're not flattening the spine, we're not risking, aggravating an already existing injury. So use a band rather than changing the technique. And things to consider as well is if you're someone who hasn't got flexion tolerance, hasn't got disc bulges herniation, yeah, you might get away with tucking your hips and peeling your back off the spine. But long term, if you think about it, what are you learning to do? You're learning to put your lower back into a weak position where it's more likely to get injured just for the sake of squeezing your glutes a bit harder. As opposed to this, where we can just put a band around your legs, learn to keep your spine in its strongest, safest position, and then still be able to get a monstrous squeeze out of your glutes, which is then going to carry over if you want to do things like, kettlebell swings, kettlebell work, squats, deadlifts, whatever you want to be. You don't want to learn to put your back into a dangerous, weakened position just to justify your glutes. So again, just by using the bands and learning to keep the back straight, I get a far greater burn on my glutes by doing this, but also there's no risk of me re-aggravating, any sort of disc injuries, or flexion tolerance. So something to consider, but that's the answer, that's my answer to that question. With glute technique and why I don't recommend people tuck their hips under. So as a summary, worst case scenario, if someone's got disc bulges and herniation or flexion tolerance, we should call it, you risk, just by trying to teach them one exercise that's supposed to help, you can make the situation far worse. And if you don't have flexion tolerance, you're learning a faulty mechanic that in order to fire your glutes properly, your spine, your lumbar spine, has to be in its weakest position, which is not a good idea for any sort of sport or lifting weight and doing things like that. So again, something to consider is, if we understand the injuries of, the mechanics of injuries, and we understand the mechanics of anatomy clearly, we can make clear decisions with, not only exercise choice, but exercise technique. And that's the key, is that, before you make these decisions, you need to understand the mechanics of what's going on. So you've got some sort of system to assess stuff. And it's always risk versus reward.